Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to another installment of Discovery Live Ask a Scientist. Once again, my name is Ben Gondras, and I'm the Dome Theater Manager at the Fort Collins Museum of Discovery, and it's my pleasure to host this program and bring these amazing experts that are right here in our Fort Collins community to you to answer all of your science questions. So tonight I'm really excited. It's been a while since we've done a Discovery Live Ask a Scientist, but we're back tonight with a really fun topic, and that is bats. So we've got some amazing experts that are about to join us on the program to answer all of your questions about bats. So with that said, if you do have questions throughout the program, please be sure to leave them in the comments section down below, and we will get those answered for you by our experts. And also, I wanted to mention that if you enjoy tonight's program, we do ask that you consider supporting the museum so that we can continue to create these types of programs for you and bring this learning and discovery and engagement to you in your own homes. And you can do that a couple different ways. One is if you're on Facebook, you should see a little donate button right below the video here. You can just click that and make a donation of any size. And you can also visit our website at fcmod.org/donate to make a donation there as well. So once again, if you do enjoy the program, please consider supporting us so that we can continue to make these sorts of things happen. All right, so with that said, I'm going to go ahead and welcome on our two guests for the evening. And joining us this evening, we have Rob Shore from Colorado State University and Donald Sulick from Vesper Bats. Welcome to the program, guys. It's so good to have you here, and hopefully we get lots of fun, interesting questions for you guys to answer about bats. So why don't we start off with just some brief introductions of both of you, and just tell us a little bit about who you are, what it is that you do, and kind of how you got to where you're at right now as well. So Rob, you're right next to me, so why don't we go ahead and start off with you?
Sure. Thanks, Ben. Thanks for having us. I'm sure Donald will also tell you that we love talking about bats. So I'm Rob Shore. I'm a research ecologist, conservation biologist, and population ecologist at Colorado State University. And I've been studying bats for about 20 years now. And here in Colorado, a lot of what keeps me busy is trying to understand populations of bats, and then also working with climbers to understand how bats use vertical cliff systems. So my role at Colorado State University is studying rare and lesser known species, and bats have been one of the passions to be able to do that.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Robert. And I'm definitely going to ask you about the climbers stuff. That I found that on your website, and I'm very interested in that as I do a little bit of rock climbing myself. So,
Excellent.
yeah, we'll get to that for sure. All right, Donald, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks. Thanks for having me here, Ben. My name's Donald, and I have been studying bats for 25 years now. I own my own bat consulting company where we dabble in everything batty, but specialize in acoustic monitoring of bats and identifying species based on their echolocation calls. Locally, I do a lot of outreach, and I give what I like to call friendly neighborhood bat talks, where I bring a projector and a screen to your lawn or a nearby park and give a 45-minute family-friendly talk on bat ecology. Further afield, I also lead tropical bat workshops in Belize twice a year, where anybody can come and catch bats and learn more about them. And I'm also writing a book on the echolocation calls of Central American bats, which is due to hit shelves this time next year, hopefully. I love bats. And the thing that excites me most about them, I think, is their wide array of amazing behaviors and adaptations. There's so many cool stories to tell about them, and so many great things yet to be discovered about them. So, yeah.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I can tell already this is going to be a very fun conversation. So why don't we start off with just some basic information about bats? And, I think one of the things that confuses people sometimes is the difference between bats and birds. Can you guys talk a little bit about what makes a bat different than a bird? And for everyone watching out there, if you do have questions, do leave those in the comments for these guys to answer. So, yeah, let's talk a little bit about bats and birds. And whoever wants to jump in.
Too good. So I think I'll briefly introduce, and Donald, you take it from there. So I think the common assumption is just flight is the common denominator, and so they automatically lump the two. But they're in completely different taxonomic groups, and birds have their own, and bats are within mammals. And so it's easy to start assuming just because you see flight that they're a similar group. Donald, you want to lead on?
That largely covers it. I think the only other two things to add are, I mean, one of the key differences there is, as mammals, all bats have fur. I think a lot of people who are used to seeing bats, you know, in horror movies or in Halloween displays don't think they're just these slimy, scaly things. Actually, bats have really nice fur. It's really plush and really soft, and so that is another thing that differentiates them from birds. And then, yeah, among mammals, bats are the only ones who have evolved powered flight, which they do using their hands, which sounds pretty weird, but it's yeah.
So, and Donald's right. Is the idea of animals this size adapting to be able to have free flight is kind of a unique group. We've only seen it a handful of times, at least in the vertebrate world, that things like birds and bats, pterodactyls, adapted the capacity to support their own flight. Most everything else is gliding, but bats do it in such a unique fashion that's it's hugely energetically expensive, but amazing to see. They have skin that's stretched between their fingers, as Donald said, and that's actually how they got their name, as chiroptera means hand wing, and that's how they support their flight. Whereas birds are doing it with feathers, really stiff, light structure that's really efficient. Bats have to add quite a bit more musculature to get themselves, and energy production to get themselves up and flying.
Yeah,
and super duper interesting. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I have a photo I can share that might
show
this a little better too. I can try sharing. Let's do this.
Let's see how this works.
Share screen. Oh dear, hold on. Where?
But Donald's right. The fur is amazingly soft. People assume
I was going to ask
creepy, suspicious creatures, and some are amazingly docile. They have no interest in you other than just to get away from you, and some are quite irritated when you handle them. So, but they're really small, delicate creatures that have an amazing. That one is not quite so small.
This one's small.
Oh wow, that's adorable.
Yeah,
go ahead, Donald.
Yeah, this one here is the giant flying fox. It's the largest bat in the world. It has a wingspan of about 6 feet, which is as wide as I am tall. So that's pretty big. But what's good about this picture too is it shows how their hands are incorporated into their wings. If you were to hold your left hand out and compare it to this bat's outstretched wing, up here at the top is the bat's thumb. Right there. And then along the edge here, the next two fingers, which are kind of hard to see. Then you have the ring finger, and this long digit here is the bat's pinky. So the rest of the bat's wing is made up of the skin that's been stretched really, really tight between their fingers. And so they are literally flying on their hands, or with the power of jazz hands. So
nice. Well, that was amazing. Yeah. Mammals flying. That's just so crazy. So can you guys talk a little bit about the role that bats play in their ecosystem? I think sometimes there's a bad connotation of bats, but what are the benefits that the ecosystem gets from having bats in it?
Yeah.
we're gonna keep figuring out who to turn to. So I'm gonna reiterate what Donald said earlier on, is that you have us on here as experts about bats, but we are learning so much annually about a group of species that are very difficult to study. And so our understanding is developing. But we're starting to appreciate better now that role that bats play in our ecosystems. And to the point where we can quantify their economic value for humans. They've estimated that the insect consumption that bats do reduces pest control costs by $23 billion annually.
Wow.
And so to understand that that kind of insect consumption has real value for what we try and produce, it's taken a long time to understand that, because bats hunt at night, they hunt small things, and it's really difficult to understand what they're preying upon. But as the technology has increased and understanding about what they're doing, it's been better to appreciate. Donald, you want to talk about pollination?
Yeah, actually. And so, I like to think of bats as being up there among birds and butterflies and bees as being one of the most beneficial species out there for humans. And so, Rob was talking about pest control services they provide. And then when you get to the tropics, you have a lot of bats that will pollinate flowers, just like butterflies or bees do. Any adults listening, if they like tequila, bats are the main pollinators of the agave plant in Mexico, which is where tequila comes from. So there's one benefit. But another 500 species of tropical plants depend on bats for pollination. And then you have the fruit eaters, and fruit eaters are also a very diverse group, again, in the tropics, and they will disperse seeds across the landscape. It's estimated that a single little fruit bat will consume 60,000 seeds in a night. And they have this amazing throughput where they'll digest the food really quickly and they'll poop the seeds out, usually when they're flying to find their next fruit. So for reforestation purposes, seed dispersal by fruit bats is a huge service too.
And we're still trying to understand all of the implications for what that means here in the U.S. because those same agave plants come into the U.S. in some limited areas, but they are their ability to eat insects, not just for pest control. We're still trying to understand what that means for maybe mosquito transmitted diseases. It's really difficult to draw links between how much bats are feeding on these insects and what that means for disease transmission in humans. But to know that they're out there consuming the mass quantities that they do could contribute to limiting possibly some of the disease outbreaks that we've even seen here in Colorado, mosquito-borne ones.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, it sounds like they have lots of benefits for us humans and just kind of the ecosystems where they live as well. So that's amazing. Oh yeah.
They're also really adorable and cute, which I think is overlooked.
You got more pictures, Donald, to prove it?
Oh yeah. I can share another one unless Ben has another question here.
Well, speaking of adorable and cute, I think one of the memes that that you see going around the internet are baby bats being wrapped up in blankets like burritos. I'm sure you guys have both seen pictures of that. I watched a video earlier today of one eating a piece of banana, and it was just the cutest thing. Oh my gosh! But why are there so many pictures of baby bats being wrapped up in blankets like that?
Well, I think part of the reason you see them is because a lot of people agree that's pretty darn adorable and cute.
Yeah.
I think most of those originate from bat rehabbers in Australia. Most of those that you see are flying fox bats, which we don't have on this side of the globe. They're more found in Australia, Asia, Africa. But I know there's a large circuit of bat rehabbers in Australia. In fact, a friend of mine once did a trip through Australia where she would spend a few days at each rehab center helping out and then moving on. That's where those come from.
Nice. Yeah, and unfortunately, you won't see the adorable pictures of fruit-eating pups in the U.S. We primarily have insect eaters here in the U.S. It's a little less adorable feeding them mealworms, but they are really adorable when they're the size of your pinky.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice. That's awesome. Well, yeah, thanks for answering that silly question. um, so we got a comment here. Someone said they would love to take pictures of bats. Have you guys had any experience taking pictures of bats? I mean, I guess it'd be pretty difficult seeing as that they're mostly out at night. Do you have any tips on taking pictures of bats?
Donald, I might pass this one to you. I when I'm typically working with bats, is I'm
Uh-huh.
rarely holding a camera when I'm doing it. And so
That's
most of
understandable.
my experience are really blurry, bad pictures because it's difficult enough doing what we have to do with bats, and then trying to get really well lit,
Mhm.
focused pictures of an organism that may not always want to be held.
Mm.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I don't have a lot of direct experience either. I mean, I try and take pictures of bats, and some of them turn out well. But yeah, you basically need a bat that's pretty chilled out and not moving in the
Mm.
dark and it's well lit. There are folks that specialize in bat photography. Merlin
Mm.
Tuttle is the one who comes to mind. He's the founder of Bat Conservation International, and his photos of bats are really what I think changed a lot of people's perceptions about
Mm.
bats because back in the day, people would take pictures of bats and they'd be with their mouth open and their teeth showing and they'd look scary. But that's not, well, 90% of the time, that's not what a bat looks like. and, and so Merlin captured that. He had these, really gentle looking animals seen flying and doing funny things or interesting things in
Yeah.
pictures. So it's not an easy skill, and I wish I had more tips to provide, but I don't.
I would imagine most people's familiarity with natural pictures of bats come from those professional photographers who are doing it in those settings. Without them, you wouldn't see some of the unique feeding tactics of something like the bulldog bat, which actually fishes by dragging its fingernails through water to
Mm.
catch fish.
Oh, wow.
And he's been able to capture that, and other people have been able to capture that in video. And Donald's right, is that kind of exposure really enlightens how valuable and adorable. I'm going to keep saying adorable, and I'm sure there's people shaking their head. Adorable bats can be.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that is so important. I mean, if you don't see it, you tend not to care about it. So it's really important that people do capture those images of bats, so that we can care about them. And Rebecca, if you're listening out there, I hope you are able to capture some amazing images. And if you do, please feel free to share them with us here at the museum, and we'd love to see them. So we've got a couple audience questions here. Sierra would like to know, what should you do if you find a bat outside during the daytime?
Great question. And it's probably the one that, Donald, I don't know about you, but I get probably more often than any other question. And the thing to realize is that bats aren't normally crawling on the ground. And so you should automatically be suspect about why it's there. Because bats' natural habitat is to be flying around, inaccessible to humans. And so if you see one crawling around, it's best not to approach it, and call a local wildlife professional. The bat could be perfectly fine and healthy and just maybe fell from a roost and is trying to crawl its way back up to a roost, or it could be one that is unhealthy, and you definitely don't want to find out, because
Mm.
bats' first response is their defense is to bite. They have sharp
Mm.
teeth and they don't want to be handled. So to prevent any kind of disease transmission to humans, it's best to call a wildlife professional first.
Yeah, no, and I think that's perfect, Rob. I think that this extends to all wild animals. If you
Sure.
see any wild animal, it's just best to leave it be. Don't approach it. Definitely don't try to handle it, and either just walk away and let it do its thing, or call a wildlife professional if it's in your house or something. Um,
Mm.
but yeah, the best rule is just, yeah, don't touch.
Hmm.
um, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's great. I think, like you said, that kind of applies to all wild animals. You probably should keep your distance and call the professionals in. So that makes a lot of sense. Rob, you mentioned roost, and I had a question about, do all bats live in caves? Because I think that's kind of the most common thing that you think of. Think of bats hanging upside down from the cave ceiling, but do bats live anywhere else?
Short answer is no. I mean, they don't just roost in caves. To
Okay.
answer your first question, is they roost in an assortment of places, and some of them we're still discovering now. The ones that we typically identify as caves and mines, we first started identifying those because those were the easiest places for humans to get access to bats. That's where we would see them.
Right.
But now we sometimes find them in homes or dwellings because bats can sometimes want the protection of something like the same buildings that we use. But they also roost in trees. They can roost in cracks and rock cracks and crevices. Am I missing any, Don?
Well, in the tropics, a lot of them will roost in leaves. Some of them will actually form tents and just hunker down underneath these, on the underside of these leaves, which protects them from precipitation and from predators as well. And then, yeah, there's others that have been found in burrows. I mean, just, yeah, there's a pretty wide diversity of things that bats will use as a home. But yeah, around Colorado, your best bets are houses and rock crevices and dead trees, and sometimes living trees, depending on the species.
And I'll advocate now that nobody should be going into mines to look for bats.
Yeah.
Recreational caving is a thing, and you can sometimes stumble upon bats, but mines are particularly hazardous areas, and we recommend no one going into those.
Yeah.
Things are coming into my mind and leaving just as fast as we have discussions about this. And so, Donald triggered probably, if people want to see the cutest bat of all, is the same bat that Donald mentioned. That's the tent-making bat. It's this Honduran white, beautiful little puff that makes these tents and these leaves, and they are exceptional. They're white, and they're just gorgeous.
Nice.
I'm pulling it up right now, Rob.
Oh, perfect.
Thank you.
Just had to navigate to it. Here they are. You can see them.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. Yeah. They're like little cotton balls with wings.
Oh,
or
wow.
marshmallows. They're very, adorable. And people wonder why their fur is white. And I mean, I don't think anyone has a convincing answer for it. But what I've observed when I've seen these guys in the field in Costa Rica is the white reflects the green of the leaves that they're roosting in. So it actually is a pretty good, effective camouflage, probably compared to other colors like red or black or something. But
Wow.
yeah, so that is the Honduran white bat. And
Wow.
well, this is a less adorable bat.
It's just kind of got a funny face. It's still cute in a way.
I think so. I have that I most want to capture and see in person. Actually, this is the wrinkle-faced bat, and
aptly named.
Yes, yeah. And what's cool is nobody knows why it has those wrinkles on its face. The theory is that maybe those it's a fruit-eating bat. So the theory is that maybe when it mashes its face into a ripe fig, the juices will help flow down those wrinkles into its mouth easier. But nobody really knows. But what's really cool about these guys is under their chin they have this flappy bit of flesh. And if you're a male wrinkle-faced bat, when you're going to mate, you go find a tree and you pull this flesh over your face, kind of like a hood. So it's hiding your face. And then they will make echolocation sounds and songs and beat their wings to try to attract females, which I think is just hilarious that they have to cover up their faces to attract the lady bat.
And Donald, can I just go back to that picture just real quick? The other thing to notice in this picture is notice the size of the eyes. That there's a misconception that bats are blind. And that's really a misnomer. Bats have great vision, but they tend, at least the ones that are flying at night, tend to rely on their echolocation to navigate, but they still have amazing sight. And so the eyes here of this particular bat illustrated, there's a one that's flying around during the day.
Wow.
Oh.
Very cool.
Yeah, so I switched it to a photo of a flying fox, which also has enormous eyes. Which these fruit and nectar feeding bats, Um, they use this good night vision to help them find fruits and flowers in the dark. But as Rob said, I mean, all bats can see just fine, but in order to navigate in the dark at high flight speeds and maybe catch small insects, they've developed other senses to help them avoid running into things. I'll stop sharing.
And that ability to navigate by sound is phenomenal, because those of us who navigate by vision, we don't appreciate the speed at which that information comes back to us. But if anybody's ever heard thunderclap after lightning, there's a delay, and so the transmission of that takes some time. And bats are able to generate that sound, receive the echoes in such a timely fashion that they can navigate while they're flying, and that processing speed in the brain is phenomenal. Their ability to project that sound is phenomenal. They're almost screaming as loud as a jet plane is when it takes off. But they're doing it in sound waves that we can't hear, thankfully.
Right. Be very noisy if we could.
Very noisy. And it doesn't project very far. It's really difficult to project sound in those wavelengths very far. And so they're doing this constantly and receiving those signals back constantly as they're flying. And so that ability to process that is just phenomenal.
Wow. It's amazing. So I think, Donald, you mentioned species identification from echolocation. Is that correct? So
yes.
Can you tell me a little bit about how that works?
Right. Well, it's not easy.
I bet.
Short answer. Well, here's the thing. So bats produce these sounds, these ultrasound, and so it's easy to think, oh, well, maybe they're like birds. I mean, birds. You hear birds singing. You hear a robin singing. That's a robin, and it's not going to be confused with anything else. But the reason for that is because robins are singing to attract mates or defend territory. So they don't want to be confused with another species. That could get awkward. But bats, their echolocation, it's evolved for two things. One is for navigation, to avoid running into things. And the other is for foraging, to catch small insects for the ones around here. Because of that, their echolocation is much more variable and flexible. So when you hearing echolocation calls does nothing for us. It all sounds the same, like tick 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 tick. It's not very useful. So what we'll then do is we'll record those sounds and display them as a visual sonogram on a computer screen, where we have frequency on the y-axis and time on the x-axis. And sometimes, for some species, their echolocation signals are diagnostic. The shape and the frequencies at which they echolocate at can tell you this is probably this type of species. But that's not. But a lot of species, because they have this very flexible method of just making their way around in the world, the signals overlap a lot. So some species are much more difficult to identify. But we try.
Cool. That sounds amazing. So seeing as bats use this echolocation and their sense of hearing to hunt and navigate, do things like sound pollution and maybe even light pollution affect them at all?
Well, I can talk about light. I'm actually giving a presentation about bats being attracted to the to the Tribute and Lights artificial light source. Tribute and Lights is the art installation that they do in New York City every year to commemorate the victims of 9/11. And this last year, they started doing that at the Flight 93 Memorial Park, and they asked me to come and do surveys to see what impact those lights might have on bats. And the short story is there wasn't really any impact on bats. Birds, those lights have a huge impact. They will they'll be attracted to those lights in huge densities, like millions and millions of birds, and then they get disoriented and confused, and they'll fly around for a long time in circles, using up a lot of their valuable energy. But the bats, they definitely were in the light beams, but they seem to just blow right through, maybe forage on an insect really quickly before moving on. And then in other parts of the world, people have studied artificial light on bats, and it just sort of depends on the wavelengths of light that are being used and the species involved. So there's some impacts of light. Rob, you want to handle sound?
I can try, but this is one of those areas that I mentioned before is we're still trying to grasp. As Donald mentioned, we're still trying to understand how to just differentiate how bats are using sound in some scenarios. So my guess is that there's probably some level of conflict, but we just don't understand it. And the other thing to realize is that because the sound is really difficult to generate and have project very far, is it takes a lot of energy to do that. So you'd have to be around something that's powerful enough to be generating sound in these frequencies far enough that it could be problematic. It likely exists. It's just an area that I'm not as familiar with.
Yeah. So I say in general, there's not a lot of evidence that noise impacts bats. I do know that one of the things that they're trying to do to help make wind turbines safer for bats, because wind turbines end up killing hundreds of thousands of bats each year from collisions with blades, is one thing that they're trying to do is put these ultrasonic deterrents up on these turbines to deter the bat. Play this ultrasonic white noise to effectively chase them away from the turbine. And that, as Rob was saying, ultrasonic white noise signals attenuate really quickly. And when you have a wind turbine with a wingspan of a football field, the sound is not going to go that far away. So while there's some limited success with using ultrasonic deterrents to keep bats away, it's a mixed bag, and probably it's not 100% effective. No.
So Ben, before we leave that subject completely, Donald brought up a great issue that's confronting bat conservation. That's wind energy development. For some reason, bats have been attracted to these and dying because of the collisions. And we're still understanding why that is. But between that and this other threat that's hit us in North America called white nose syndrome, is that we've seen mortality events in bats that we've never seen before. We've lost millions of bats. And so right now we are addressing bat conservation in new ways because we've been able to diagnose that we've seen loss that we haven't seen before.
And
between white nose syndrome and wind energy development, it's a bad time to be a bat in North America right now. But
yeah, that is too bad. Yeah, it's always interesting to think about the human wildlife interface and kind of when we do something, it affects the natural world, and and it can go both ways. And I think speaking of that, and the current situation that we're all experiencing right now with the coronavirus pandemic, I think one of the theories is that somehow the coronavirus was transmitted from a bat to a human. And can you talk a little bit about how that works and how a disease like the coronavirus or some other disease might get transmitted between a bat and a human, and what we can do to prevent that kind of thing?
So this is Donald, you chime in at any time here. So this is also really evolving understanding. I'm not a disease ecologist or an epidemiologist. There's people who understand this a little bit better.
Sure.
But this idea of transmission of diseases from animals to humans has been around for centuries. And it's not just mammals. It's not just bats. It can happen even in large bundles of birds. We've seen transmission of diseases that we don't normally associate with being ones that humans would be susceptible to, just because we're in proximity in large numbers for long periods of time. And so we're not sure the origin of COVID-19 for how its transmission came to humans, but there is a closely related COVID virus, coronavirus, in bats. There's also a very closely looking one in other species of mammals too.
Okay.
So it's tracking the original source of this has still been problematic. And Donald, again, chime in, because the science is constantly evolving. This, our understanding about how this transmitted to humans and through humans is evolving constantly. So The short answer is that usually they call these spillover events, is when a disease that's harbored within a wildlife population then jumps to an unnatural host. It's usually because there's increased proximity of those organisms that didn't exist before. Mm-hmm. And some of the theories that I think are gaining momentum and understanding how these diseases have become more prevalent recently is how humans have encroached in natural habitats that once were the primary habitat resources for these organisms. And as that continues to happen, we get closer and closer more frequently to organisms that we don't normally have contact with. And that can generate these kind of spillover events. But again, we're still trying to diagnose the exact origins of COVID-19. Mm-hmm. Donald, am I missing anything?
No, that was pretty thorough. And yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, I think most people assume this virus originated in bats, partly because the last SARS epidemic originated in bats. So that was, the most likely suspect. And then bats themselves, they actually do harbor a lot of viruses. It's actually kind of a, if you can step back from it academically, it's pretty cool phenomenon that bats are able to harbor all these viruses and not seem to be too affected by them. But yeah, and so yeah, the thought I think is that it most likely came from a bat, and maybe a bat, taken into a bush meat market situation was then kept in close captivity to, I don't know, a civet cat or something, where the disease might have jumped from the bat to the cat, and then evolved this, evolved a way to be infectious to humans through the cat. But I mean, it's like Rob said, it's a very constantly evolving story, and details are being looked at, but they change a lot, as science does.
Yeah. And Donald brought up a great point. Is the reason we understand so well about some of these diseases is because bats have been phenomenal at their ability to carry a wide variety and still survive. Is that they have phenomenal healing powers and infection fighting powers that we still are beginning to appreciate. Sometimes with organisms changing their status with diseases, not having it, and not becoming infected and not becoming ill from it. And so bats are a phenomenal model. And I always argue that if we really want to fight these new appearing diseases, the best model that we need to continue to study and keep around are bats. Instead of getting rid of them, thinking that if we just get rid of them, it'll go away, that's usually not the solution. The solution is figuring out how they've been able to fight them so well for so long.
That is very cool. But just to clarify, a bat biting you is not going to give you superpowers, correct?
Okay, you're thinking Spider-Man.
Oh, right. Yeah, wrong one. Well, all the more reason to call the experts if you do happen across a bat in the wild that seems hurt or injured or something else like that.
Yes, and if you're ever bit by a bat, immediately see a physician. Bats, they're amazing. Their amazing capacity to fight infections means they can sometimes be carriers and not demonstrate being sick, and they can still transmit those. And one of the things they're notoriously held culpable for is rabies, even though there's other mammals that carry it at higher rates than bats do. It just so happens that sick bats are the ones that are found by humans. They're not flying. Oh, and so only the ones that are already sick are the ones that are reported. And so you get this increased level of assuming that bats are the carriers, but you never get access to the healthy ones that never come down to you. They're never accessible. Rarely accessible.
Yeah, I mean, in my career, I've handled tens of thousands of bats, and only 2 of them have ever turned out to be rabid. So yeah, the vast majority of bats flying around are going to be healthy individuals. I mean, you still shouldn't get bit by them. Don't take any chances. But yeah, I think the statistic is less than 1% of all bats carry rabies. So it's a shame they've been so highly persecuted for this disease, which, as Rob said, I mean, I'd be more worried about dogs and raccoons and skunks. But yeah.
Yeah. Cool. It sounds like we're always learning more and discovering new things. So that's amazing. Before we get too far along and run out of time, Rob, I do want to ask you about the Climbers for Bat Conservation. What is that program all about?
So, thanks for asking about it. It's a pet project of mine that actually has now gotten me into climbing simply because I want to understand the perspective the climbers have.
Nice.
The challenge when the disease white nose syndrome hit North America is that in the East, when it caused mass mortality, it was really relatively easy to diagnose. You had millions of bats that were dead at the opening of caves and mines, and it was really obvious there was something attacking bats. In the western part of North America, we don't quite have the assemblages that they do in small locations, in localized locations. We think we have the same number of bats, they're just using different features on the landscape. And so it was a struggle for Western biologists to identify where bats could be roosting. And it was through conversations with climber friends of mine that they just kind of mentioned, well, we sometimes see bats. And I kind of thought that was kind of interesting. And they said, well, talk to other climbers. And eventually came across a climb in Colorado. It's called chiroptophobia, which means fear of bats. And the ones who climbed it knew that if you were up there late in the evening, hundreds of bats would come pouring out of the crack.
Oh, wow.
And that's when it kind of dawned on my collaborators and me that we really need to have conversations regularly with climbers about what they're seeing. And for about 5 years now, this Climbers for Bat Conservation has been the collaboration between bat biologists and land managers and climbers just to share information. Have climbers let us know when they see bats while they're climbing. And if they start seeing populations like that one at chiroptophobia, that could be an area where biologists like Donald or I could go out there and film how bats are leaving. We got amazing video technology now that allows us with things like night vision or thermal cameras to film bats as they come out. And that might be a way of monitoring populations in the future. What I've learned, though, is just the outreach to climbers has become a way of spreading the news about bat conservation, because a lot of climbers, probably like yourself, Ben, have a great environmental ethic, and they want to talk about conservation. They appreciate being outside. And so it's been a really nice collaboration for extending the need for bat conservation to a whole different group.
Wow. Yeah, that sounds like a super amazing collaboration. It's just so cool to see, the sciences and the recreational users collaborating like that and learning from each other. That can really take us so far. That's amazing.
Have you ever seen bats while you climb, Ben?
I don't think I have. I guess I haven't been out late enough in the evening, so I might have to.
Climbers are telling me, because we see bats roosting in the cracks during the day, and so even during climbing during the day, you'll hear squeaking in the cracks. So
yeah. I've definitely seen bat poop. Guarna, is that the
guano?
Guano, yeah. So definitely seen evidence of bats, but yeah. Cool. Well, we've got another audience question here, and this audience member would like to know, what are some ways that we can protect bats, or help? What are some ways that we can help protect bats? Sorry.
I've been talking a lot, Donald. You go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's great. It's a great question. The shortest answer is education. I mean, things like what we're doing right here, getting folks that are knowledgeable about bats to tell people more about them and get people more familiar with them and understand why they're beneficial and why they may not be as scary as Hollywood makes them out to be. So education's the best tool right there. More hands-on ways to help bats might be to build or buy a bat house that you can put up in your yard or on your property that can help provide roosting habitat that might be being lost from other development. So as far as bat houses go, they're tricky. I mean, they're not like bird houses or bird feeders where you put them up and boom, you got animals. It's a longer game, largely because bats can be really, really picky, and humans can be very, very impatient. So,
This is true.
the trick is to do your research and find out what the best location for a bat house would be in your yard. In this part of the country, you can put one on a 10 or 15-foot pole in your yard, or just affix it to the side of your house, facing south, because that gets the most solar exposure during the day, and probably painted a brownish color. Bats are really picky about microclimate, so figuring that out is key. And then hopefully you're also in an area that you're aware there are bats flying around. Maybe you've seen them at dusk, or maybe you have trees and water in your neighborhood. Those are good signs that you might have a successful bat house. But it is tricky. Don't get discouraged, and I would encourage just putting up a bunch and monitoring them, and making sure they don't get clogged with wasps or anything every once in a while. And hopefully, if you watch them at dusk, you might see some bats fly out, or if you put a little tarp underneath, you might start to see the guano collect there. So,
yeah. And Donald illustrates a great point too, is that we typically put up a bird box because birds will nest in it and produce young. We're learning that bats use roosts in different ways, and different groups of bats, males and females and young and adults, use roosts in different ways. I study a colony near Steamboat where it's a maternity colony, where it's adult females and their pups, and the temperature inside that roost gets up to 125 degrees Fahrenheit. And so it's really warm. But come evening, or sometimes during the day, others might be wanting a cooler spot so they can shut down their metabolism. And so Donald's right, is be persistent, put them up in multiple locations, and eventually they might find how they want to use that spot. But it is a bit more challenging. The other thing I would advocate for is, as Donald started off with, is education. And I think what we need to do is understand better how our interest in controlling insects impacts bats. Is that we typically think of all insects as pests, and controlling them is exactly what we want to do. And with some of them, that is the pattern we want to take. But broadcast killing of the food items for these bats can be detrimental on how they survive during different times. It takes a lot of energy. If you're going to hibernate, shut down your metabolism, you have to put on a lot of fat before winter. And that takes getting access to a lot of big, juicy insects. And that can be challenged if we don't understand how the control mechanisms, poisons that we might use, impact the food items they normally get access to.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Rob, you just said hibernate. Bats hibernate?
They do, but I think everybody has a kind of slightly warped idea of what hibernation is. Is we tend to think of, when it gets cold, the animal goes to sleep and shuts down for 6 months and then emerges. Hibernation is a little bit more nuanced, as we find out that the animals that do this, first of all, hibernation is pretty specific. The animal shuts down its body temperature to near freezing, shuts down their metabolism to almost indetectable. They've clocked a heart rate of bats to 10 to 20 beats per minute in the winter.
Wow.
Whereas in the summer, some of those same bats are flying around 1,000 beats per minute. So orders of magnitude in how their physiology changes. And so the bats that go through this process, they shut down their metabolism, the temperature gets really low, but they only stay in that state for 1, 2, 3 weeks. And they might awaken from that for a short period of time. Why? We're still trying to understand. Maybe getting rid of wastes, maybe getting a drink, maybe trying to find an insect item to replenish. We're still trying to understand why they do that. But throughout that winter season, they go through this process of short, what they call torpor bouts, and then awaking, and then another torpor bout, all throughout the season, as a method of conserving your energy when the main thing you feed on isn't available. There aren't insects flying around when it's wintertime.
Right.
Yeah. And so yeah, most of our bats around here will hibernate during the winter. They're hibernating right now. But we do have 3 species in Colorado: the eastern red bat, the hoary bat, and the silver-haired bat, that they migrate south for the winter, like birds do, where they can find warm temperatures year-round and find insects to eat year-round, and then migrate back up here in the spring to resume eating our insects. The other, I love the heartbeat example with hibernation, because Yeah, that really puts it in perspective when their heart is only beating once every 6 seconds. Um, the other the other stat I've heard is that a hibernating bat will only take one breath every 90 minutes. So,
Wow.
they took a breath right now, it would be, yeah, I don't know, can't do time and hold my breath. But anyway, yeah,
Wow.
it'd be a while from now. But they do this by doing this by shutting everything down. They save so much energy that it
Mhm.
allows a bat to basically avoid eating anything all winter long. So you imagine that you had dinner on Halloween and then didn't eat again until Easter.
Mhm.
That's pretty powerful stuff there.
Yeah, that is amazing. These guys
Ben,
are
you
just.
you
Oh, go
cut us
ahead.
you cut us off if we keep talking too long. But
No, you're fine.
another point that Don brings up is that we understand that even bats like the ones that migrate will go through short bouts where they'll shut down their physiology.
Hmm.
Is that they'll take a break and shut down. They're really efficient when they don't need to be up and about. They shut down their physiology for short periods of time to conserve that energy.
Wow.
We study bats in Colorado. They're 6 grams. So, I mean, that's pennies.
It's a
Right.
nickel right there.
Yeah, a nickel. And they're going out each evening to replenish energy that they're losing on such a small body size that's putting out a lot of power output to hunt. They're flying. Flight is really expensive. And so they're really investing a lot of energy to get that energy back and then shutting down as quickly as they can to conserve it when they don't need to.
That's amazing. Well, we've only got a few minutes left, and it's been just an absolute pleasure talking to you guys and getting to ask all the audience questions. But I think to close us out, trying to decide between two options. I guess let's go with this. What? Tell us about a favorite story that you have of working with bats in the field.
Wow.
They're all fantastic. I've got one, Rob. If unless you got one,
Start us off.
right? So the Western Mastiff bat is the largest bat in the United States. It has a wingspan of about 2 feet. It's not found in Colorado, but it is found in Arizona. And I still remember the first time I ever captured one is we're sitting out by this pond in this high elevation forest, and this is one of the few bats that makes an audible echolocation sound. Most of them are above our frequency, our threshold for hearing, but as Rob said, they're really freaking loud. And this guy was super loud. You heard this ear splitting choo 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 flying around, and it went choo choo choo. So we're all very excited. We know what's out there, and then it stops. And we shine a light on the net that we use to capture bats, and there it is in the net. And we go out there and grab it. And it's like a chihuahua in the net. It's this huge animal that is just wonderful. And the cool thing about these guys is he's really calm and chill about the whole procedure. You extract him from the net, and he was just like, yeah, okay, whatever. and we took the measurements we needed and let him go. Other bats, smaller ones, are more feisty. They let you know they don't want to be held, and they will just continually bite at you and be really upset, which you have to admire, right? I mean, if I was that size of an animal and something huge came and grabbed me, I would just die. But these guys are fighters, man. They will and they'll give you a lot of problems. That's my story.
Nice.
Mine's about a bat that we have here in Colorado. And it's actually my favorite bat. It's called the pallet bat.
Oh, yeah.
And I had a project with a collaborator here at CSU where we put telemeters on them that would allow us to track where they were going. We found them these really beautiful cliff systems in southeastern Colorado. But the reason I like this one so much is that its method of feeding is atypical to what people think about how bats feed on insects or arthropods, as people typically think bats flying in midair and catching things in mid-flight. This one specializes in identifying things that are on leaves or on the ground, and it will attack prey items that seem well out of bounds of anything its size that it should be eating. So they'll eat tarantulas, they'll eat millipedes, any scorpions. There's a video of scorpions stinging pallid bats and pallid bats still coming after them to eat them. They've even been known to eat small rodents. They are ferocious predators, but they're adorable in hand. They're light colored. They have a hog nose face, but they're just the cutest, ferocious predators that I've fallen in love with.
They're my favorite bat here in the States as well. They always seem to be smiling. It's great. I wish I had a picture of one of those to show. I have one eating a scorpion, but not the smiling one. That's a better note to end on. But yeah, that's a great species.
Nice. Well, as I said before, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to both of you about bats. I definitely have a newfound appreciation for bats, and I will definitely keep an eye out for them when I'm out doing some rock climbing. So I'll let you know if I ever find any, Rob. And for everyone out there watching, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for the amazing questions. And hopefully you all learned a lot about bats as well, and maybe appreciate them a little bit more as well. So we'll talk to you guys later, Rob and Donald.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Museum.
Yep. And also for everyone out there watching, if you did enjoy tonight's program, be sure to check out our website to find out when we're doing more of these. We're doing Discovery Lives every other week, and I'll also be giving you a update on the night sky every other Wednesday evening as well. So be sure to check out our website to find out when those things are happening. And also, if you enjoyed tonight's program, we do ask that you consider making a donation to the museum so that we can continue to do these types of programs. We do these with your support, so that is what makes them possible. And with that being said, thank you so much for joining us here for Discovery Live, Ask a Scientist, and we will see you at the next one. Have a great night, everyone.